Alright guys, good afternoon. We are starting a new unit today called Polynomials. And that may be a word that you're not super familiar with, but you have actually seen polynomials and you just don't know that you have. So poly, hopefully you've kind of heard that term. Poly means many, okay? So like when you think about Greek mythology, they were polytheist because they had many gods. You may have heard that word before. In geometry, you may have heard the word polygon, which is something with many sides. In Algebra 2, when we say polynomials, that is any equation or any expression with at least one term. So if I say y equals 4, that's a polynomial because it's got at least one term. If I was to say, let's say y equals x squared plus 3x plus 12, that's a polynomial. And I can keep going. Those are what we are looking at in this unit. So just a couple of vocab terms you need. We looked a lot a unit or two ago at solving, and we said you were finding the solution when you told me what x was. There's a couple other words that you're going to hear me use other than solution, and that is root or zero. Okay. When you hear me use those two words, root or zero, that is exactly the same thing as a solution. So if I ask you to solve an equation, instead of saying find the solution, I might say find the root or find the zero. Okay? Another word that you may not have heard before, the multiplicity. Okay. So the word multiplicity tells me how many times a zero occurs. So for example, sometimes when we factored in the last unit, you might get the exact same number twice. That would mean it would have multiplicity too. Let's say I factor something and I solve it and I get the answers 3 and 5, then 3 and 5 would both have multiplicity 1 because I only got those answers one time each. Okay? So let's use this and see how that helps us. So example A says write a polynomial in factored and standard form. And we'll talk about what that looks like, with negative 3 and 2 as zeros of multiplicity 1. So let's break that down. The first thing it tells me is that my zeros, or my solutions, were negative 3 and 2. So what that means is when I solved the equation, I got x equals negative 3, and I got x equals 2. Okay? That multiplicity 1 tells me that I got them each one time. So then, here's what they actually ask me for. They say write it in factored form. Well, if my solutions were negative 3 and 2, think about what your factors would have been. Your factors would have been x plus 3 and x minus 2. That right there is factored form. If it asks you for factored form, you're done. You say, okay, if these were my solutions, what were my factors? They had opposite signs. Let's say though that they ask you for this in standard form. Putting things in standard form means you actually take these two parentheses and you go ahead and you distribute them out. So let's do that. If I distribute out, first thing I get is x squared. Then I take x times negative 2, and I get negative 2x. Then I'm going to distribute the 3. So 3 times x is 3x. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. Okay? Your very, very last step here is to put together your like terms. So I see a negative 2x and a 3x. I put those together, and that becomes 1x. So just to make yourself a little note, this right here in parentheses is factored form. Okay? When I go ahead and distribute it out, whatever my answer is, that is standard form. Okay? And right there we're done. I got the polynomial that has the zeros of negative 3 and 2. And if you were to work backwards, if you were to go through the process of factoring this, you would find out that if I factor and solve, I get negative 3 and 2. It can go forwards or it can go backwards. Okay? Let's say I look at part B. It says write a polynomial in factored and standard form with 1 as a 0. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. X equals 1. 1 was one of my answers. This one had multiplicity 2. So off to the side, just to keep myself as a little reminder, I'm going to put times 2 to remind myself that when I factored, I got that answer twice. Okay? Then it says I got negative 4 as a 0 of multiplicity 1. So x equals negative 4 was my other 0, and it only happened one time. So if you want to make yourself a note that it happened one time, you can. I'm not going to. So now I start to work backwards. If I'm going to write this in factored form, if x equals 1 was my 0 or my solution, then the factor that came from would have been x minus 1. Okay? But it had multiplicity too. Well, the way I say that is I say that it is squared. It happens twice. Okay? Same thing over here. If x equals 4 was my solution or my 0, that's what I got when I actually solved, then my factor that came from would have been x plus 4. If it asks you for factored form, you're done right there. There's my answer. Okay. If it asks me for standard form, it's going to ask me to go ahead and distribute, and I want you to watch how I do that, okay? This little squared right here means that I'm going to write this twice. I would recommend that you go ahead and write that out before you distribute. Anytime it's squared, I have to write it twice. Now, I'm going to go ahead and distribute, and I'm just going to take it one step at a time. I'm not going to worry about the x plus 4 right now. I'm just going to distribute these first two parentheses. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 1 is negative 1x. Then I do exactly the same thing with the negative 1. Negative 1 times x is negative 1x. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. Okay. And at that point, I'm going to go ahead and put my like terms together. So you get x squared minus 2x plus 1. Okay. That took care of the first two parentheses. But I still have that x plus 4. So now, I'm going to take the answer that I just got and distribute again to x plus 4. I'm going to scroll up so I have just a little bit more room here. Okay? So I'm going to start by taking x squared times everything over here. So x squared times x, that's 3 total x's, so x cubed. X squared times 4 would be 4x squared. Then I do the same thing with the negative 2x. Negative 2x times x is negative 2x squared. Negative 2x times 4 would be negative 8x. We are almost done. We got one more thing to distribute. We're going to take that 1 and distribute it. So 1 times x is x. 1 times 4 is 4. Okay, and once again, after I distribute, I always see if I have any like terms. This time I have a couple. So x cubed doesn't have anything, so I write it down. But I do have a 4x squared minus a 2x squared that I can put together. 4 minus 2 is 2. I also have a negative 8x plus x. Well, negative 8 plus 1 is a negative 7x. And lastly, I have a plus 4 on the end. And there's my answer. That is something you may not have seen before. That is called a cubic. But I want you to think about what you started with. You started with getting 1 twice as an answer and getting negative 4 once as an answer. That's 3 total answers. That's why you're ending up with an x cubed here next to the third. Over here on example A, I just got 2 answers. Okay, you had a negative 3 and a 2. That was it. So by the time you distribute it all out, you just had an x squared, a quadratic. Okay, so that's why you're getting an x squared versus an x cubed. So what I would like for you to do, take the rest of class, go ahead and practice there on the back, and let me know if you have any questions.